Welcome to Coastal Voices, the show that brings you stories about life on Hatteras Island. This is Susan West, your host for the evening. The stories you'll hear tonight capture the spirit of people from Rodanthe to Hatteras Village. The storytellers come from all walks of life, and topics include everything from childhood memories to fish tales, community traditions to big storms, hard work to daring adventures. The stories are from recordings collected by local volunteers in the Coastal Voices Oral History Project. You'll meet some of those volunteers in the show tonight. To learn more about the project, please visit our website at carolinacoastalvoices.com. In an interview with Susan West, Jeff Oden talks about learning to surf on a pop-out and about surfing on Hatteras Island in the 1960s and 70s.
He used to sell toys through his store. Okay. I'd go with him to Norfolk there in his truck there and pick up toys and all kinds of stuff. And I saw these old, essentially what were known as pop-outs. They were old foam surfboards, and the rails weren't taped, and they had a tendency when we'd take them to the beach, they'd stay out in the sun for part of the summer there, and first thing you know, the rails would start cracking, and then they'd fill up with water. That's probably why my back is hurt, either that or pounding, and I'm not sure which.
Where was your dad's store?
It's where Nito's is now.
Okay.
It's Oden's General Merchandise then, and he ran it until Mark took it over, and he went out to the motel.
Is that where your grandfather's fish house was?
Well, it was where Oden's dock is. When I went to Nesson and Sales, that was a toy store my father used to go up. He would buy all kinds of stuff. He'd buy washers and dryers for the old General Merchandise down there, and then he had toys on the shelf. Saw that old Malibu sitting in there, and I thought it was the hottest thing going. It was a bright red one, and I ended up coming home one year from a sailing camp my parents had sent me to, and I ended up, by the time I got home, I had a birthday, and that was the end of the sailing camp, I can tell you that, because I had a surfboard. So.
How old were you?
I was 11.
Did you teach yourself how to surf?
Yeah, just paddled out, and those things, they were barges anyway. You couldn't fall off of them. You get the thing going, caught a wave with it, and you could stand up. Burness Balance broke my heart the first day I took that old Malibu down to the beach. He said, "That sure is a pretty bright red pop-out you've got there," because that's what they called those. And of course, I think he probably had a Hobie. He had got a nice board. He was doing it, Buddy Hooper. You had John Oakes, Johnny Connery was coming along around then, same time. And we'd gather our nickels and pennies together and throw a few coins there in Wayne's gas tank. And scud on up to Buxton in his old Falcon if we didn't have a wave down here in Hatteras. Back then, it was a bit different than it is now. You see a car pull up, you say, "Oh no." Nowadays, back then you were glad to see somebody because nobody else was doing it.
Do you remember when out-of-town surfers started showing
well, there were a
up?
few that would pop in here or then, and some of the guys come from Virginia Beach or whatnot, and we'd go out of our way to be friendly back then, and it's not to say we're not now, but
the relationship between the local surfers and the out-of-towners is pretty good.
Oh yeah, it was great. Okay. I mean, through the 70s, I would say. I don't know, it might have started taking a downturn in the mid to late 70s, or then it was pretty big influx of out-of-towners, and I'd probably faded a little bit out of it by then to where I kind of got out of it for a few years, having to accept responsibilities with the family, and it's not to say I quit surfing, it's just to say it wasn't my focus like it was prior and is now. Interestingly enough, when I was in high school, and I got in a car wreck in my last year of high school, and I ended up breaking my leg and about every other bone in my body, and quickest way back in the water is about a month and a half later, I just happened to be checking out my Surfer magazine, and they had a knee board in there, and that was unique to me because I'd been surfing for 8 or 9 years by then, and so I got that. Finally got my leg. I never did have a cast on it. And I don't know, within a month and a half, I hobbled down to the jetty there and with my crutch. Went to the lighthouse, and Rob Fincham reminded me of that the other day. He said, the first time I saw you, you were hobbling down there with a crutch. You jumped in and paddled out.
Carol Midget of Waves describes the changing village boundaries on Hatteras Island in an interview with John Griffin, who might or might not live in Salvo.
Tell me about the village boundaries. I remember once that you told me that I don't really live in Salvo.
No, they have changed them all. Years ago, the boundary was like the Methodist church. One side was Rodanthe, one side was Waves. The people in the church in Rodanthe sat on the north side of the church. People in Waves sat on the south side of the church. That was the dividing line between Waves and Rodanthe, was at the church road. And then the south end was at Brick Creek, and that's in the curve there where the water comes up on the road. So you don't actually live where you think you live. But it's been changed several times, but that's where it was right there,
okay.
On that curve of that road. There was people that moved stuff from Avon, like a cottage had moved up here, and I remember hearing him saying, what in the world, I thought I was in one town and I'm in another. And of course my father had cattle in there at that time, from right here where the Down Under restaurant is, to almost to that ice cream place, and we never had any cattle in Salvo, and they were always in Waves. And then all of a sudden, they say the fire departments did it, made all the changes back and forth, but I think when I was with the sheriff's department, they would change the sign would be stuck up where KOA is now. At one time, they had it all the way down where one of the post offices used to be, where Edwards had the post office. It would be down along in there. So they moved them signs back and forth, and really the people who's moved in here don't know where they're living.
Well, I can attest to that.
Josephine Oden was born in Hatteras Village in 1921. In an interview with Susan West, Miss Jo talks about village girls getting into mischief, her father, and the family store, Austin's General Merchandise.
Before that Sunday, a shipwreck had come washed ashore. It was quite a place for the boys. You know, there would be these cracks in the part of the boat that came out. There were all these cracks, and the boys would go down there and play. And the water would come up through the cracks in the thing, and so one Sunday, they were down there, and they all took off their clothes. Well, us girls happened to be going down there, so we went down there. We saw that they had their clothes off. We took them and ran, turned around and looked, and they were naked right behind us. So we dropped the clothes and boy, we took off.
Were you allowed to go out on the beach with your girlfriends? They didn't mind that?
Of course not. Daddy was when he was quite young, he was taken sick and was badly bent. But he was right there with everybody. I mean, people went to him to have this sawed or that sewed or all sorts of stuff. They just came to Daddy.
So he was very helpful and supportive
of the whole village.
The whole village.
Yeah, we were right across from the school. If anybody wanted anything, they came to the store. Mr. Anders.
Mr. Anders.
Mr. Anders. They went to Mr. Anders' store to get whatever they needed.
Were there other general stores here in Hatteras?
Oh, yeah. Red and White was here before Daddy was. Billy Mitchell was in and out of Daddy's store all the time, and just all sorts of stuff like that.
He was.
Shank, they gave him a job. Shank was my brother, and they hired him to do something.
Okay.
So he was the only one that got paid on Saturdays. Saturday nights, the men were all around the pot-bellied stove in the store. telling their tales.
I guess that's where news traveled fast, probably at the store.
Right, yeah. And if anybody wanted anything, they came to Daddy. People relied on him.
Must have made you proud of your father.
Definitely did.
This is Susan West. Mike Scott of Buxton built the Lucy B., my husband Rob's commercial fishing boat. In a Coastal Voices interview, Mike talks about boat building on Hatteras Island.
Rocky built beach doors. He's the only one that, well, Willie Austin built a few, but Mr. Rocky, he built them. There weren't many being built. A very big influence on me was Dennett Ransom. He was a shop teacher.
Okay.
He was also a math teacher. The teachers then did it all. I was able to be in the shop 3 periods out of 6. So I was monkeying with wood all the time. So maybe I had an inclination towards that early on. But and I'd gotten to know Willie Austin. I'd go up and see him because he was building boats. And Nacy Peel built a few boats.
And Nacy Peel down in Hatteras?
Hatteras, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Michael's uncle.
Okay, so he built boats also.
Yeah, not like Willie though. Willie's the only one Willie was really in production.
He was?
Yeah, he was a full-time boat builder. Willie
What
Austin.
kind of boats did
Mostly
he build?
skiffs. He did build a very few bigger dead rise boats, but not many. Mostly flat-bottom boats.
Okay. Do you have any idea if any of those are still around? have
Probably
survived?
occasionally. He had a distinct shear line, and you could spot them a mile away if you saw one.
Do you remember when you decided you were going to try to build a boat?
I was fascinated with the beach fishing, so I kept looking at the boats we were doing, and I got friendly with Willie Austin, and there was Mr. Rocky had an old boat, a beach dory in the woods not far from where I lived. I lived on Rocky Ralston Road. I took the lines off this little dory that Mr. Rocky had built, and with some coaching from Willie Austin, I built one for myself. Eventually I built one for Rudy Gray and some other people. So I was sort of a commercial fisherman, boat builder, part-time working out in the open. Then when we moved over here in the woods, I built a little shed, which is actually right over where that garage is now. All it had was a roof. That's all I needed. I was building small boats. Eventually, I started building a few dead rise boats. In 1979, I built that shop down there. I was pretty much full-time boat building.
What type of boats did you build?
Started out flat-bottom boats, especially beach dories. I think I built 47 boats altogether, but at least 20 of them were under 20 feet. And probably 2/3 of those were beach dories. Probably built about 14 beach dories, up to 24 foot, 26 foot, I think.
Like when you see that boat out there, or you see other boats that you've built, do you feel an attachment?
Yeah, a little bit,
I mean,
It's in it, kind of
Were
interesting.
they like your, kind of like your babies?
Yeah,
when
a
you,
little bit.
I mean, how long does it take to build a boat?
Well, we built that. I had a crew of 2, myself being 3. Built that Mamacita in 6 months. But golly, I was working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's the biggest one I built. She's 39 foot. And
Okay.
the one that Rob has is 36. I was fishing in the inlet, I think it was 2 years ago, and Tommy Merrill was not far from me. He often isn't. I didn't notice it, but Tommy called me on the radio. He said, "Michael, look offshore." There's a Lucy B coming in. And then Tommy was on the inshore side of me, and Rob was coming in from mackerel fishing. I said, "Yeah, all the kids coming back."
Uh-huh.
It's pretty neat. Yeah, it's good to see them still working because it's just a pile of lumber unless it's doing something. They were doing something, feeding people.
Where did you get the lumber?
Almost all the lumber I used building boats came from the northeastern part of this state, primarily from Mose White and South Mills, all the juniper. Mose White, that's what they called him. His real name was Moses. One unique thing about Moses White, they said he's the only man in history to ever log the same track of juniper twice in a lifetime. That's what I heard said. I don't know. But he had the ability to do that most people wouldn't because he kept working till he was 90.
Uh-huh.
And he was not a logger. He would buy a track of timber, have somebody log it.
And is juniper the same as white cedar?
Yes, southern white cedar is the technical name.
And why is that good for a boat?
It's rot resistant. It swells easily but not excessively, so it keeps them tight, easy to work. And then another lumber I used a lot of for framing was cypress. And a guy named John Kite in Indian Town, Camden, east of Elizabeth City, he cut the cypress for me.
Artist and mapmaker Jim Mitchum of Hatteras talks to John Griffin about Outer Banks place names changing over time.
So let's get back to place names. How do you go about researching where the old names came from and how they transition into the names we use today?
You know, some of my maps, like I was telling you about the hand-drawn maps, I do. One of them, I have a limited edition version of the Outer Banks portion of John White's map. John White was Sir Walter Raleigh's cartographer, and he was a watercolorist. He does the very first English version map of the Outer Banks, Chesapeake Bay, and the rest of eastern North Carolina's coastline. From that map, there's so many lessons that school kids can learn nowadays. I think this map is probably one of the most important maps in North Carolina's history. If not for this map, we wouldn't have any idea the names of the Indian tribes are located, where their locations, where the villages were located. Some of the names that survived from that, very few, but still, to give you an example, the Pamlico Sound right out here was to the Indians Minso. The Albemarle Sound just north of Roanoke Island is Weotimiot. It's names like that. If you don't record them on maps, place names like that, they tend to get lost over time. So I try to record that as names like that as much as I can. But some of the things I've learned from studying John White's map is just amazing stuff you learn. For example, like the name Ocracoke. You know, there's all kinds of legends of where the name started, but it actually started from John White's map. All John White had to go by were Indian names, right? There's no Kitty Hawk, there's no Elizabeth City, there's no Nag's Head at this time. They were just Indian names. Well, the first English recorded name for Ocracoke is Wakakan. And if you study maps from English maps from 1585 forward, you'll see that the name Ocracoke evolves from that first English spelling, Wakakan. And you'll see different spellings over time. You'll see Wakakan, Wakacock, Occacock, and eventually Ocracoke. So it's things like that that you find out when you study maps and old charts, and I try to record them as much as I can. There's other things that you learn from studying John White's map that are really interesting. That's like there was an inlet right where present-day Canadian Hole is located, in between Buxton and Avon, or Kinnicky. I like to refer to it as Kinnicky. And the name of the inlet was Chancandapeco. Where does that come from? Well, Sir Walter Raleigh's, and in this case, one of the people leading one of his expeditions, they're using an early Spanish map from the 1560s. Their pilot is Portuguese, and he has in his possession a 1560s Spanish map. And this name was already recorded on the Spanish map. So when John White does his map, he honors that map and carries that name over to this inlet that's located at Canadian Hole. The Spanish cartographer probably faced the same thing that John White did. All he had to go by were Indian names. And he's probably standing on the shores in Buxton and asking the Indians along there, what's the name of this inlet? In Spanish, of course. And the name is Chancandapeco. Things like that you learn on when you're studying old maps like this.
Photographer Mike Helminski of Waves talks with Susan West about moving to the island to surf, working as a brick mason here, and how a hobby turned into a profession.
I'd come down on these camping trips, and then of course when it's time to leave, you know, you kind of see how nice it is when you leave the area. You miss it, and subsequent trips the same reaction. I just thought, well, I'm just going to take this step and just load the car up and see what happens. And my intent was maybe to get my feet wet, so to speak, for about 6 months. The more I did live here, the less I wanted to leave. I think I liked the lifestyle, the isolation. I lived in Lovey and Valton Midget had a little cottage in Rodanthe, and 2 of my friends from Ocean City moved here I guess that would have been the summer of '67, and moved in with them. And my surfing buddy at the time up in Delaware and Maryland was a guy named Louis Batzler. And then Louis and I found a trailer available for rent in Waves, so we rented that from Luke Midget. Louis was a brick mason, So that's how we made our money. I would mix his mortar, and he would lay the block or the brick, and we worked when we needed the money. The rest of the time we looked for ways. Some of the cemeteries in the villages here with cinder block walls around them, we built them. And so once the locals knew about Louis's skill as a mason, you know, some of the families were calling him and said, "Oh, can you put this wall around our family plot?" We got jobs with a building contractor, John Luke. He lived in Salvo, and he had a crew. We started working with him. But that crew had some of the local boys on it, Jimmy Hooper and Larry Midget, a few others. And that kind of got me mixed in with the locals a little bit, because it was coming here from the outside, it was a little difficult to get accepted. Photography was my hobby in high school, and I was kind of getting more into that. You know, I saw this environment here, and it really inspired me.
When you moved here, did you bring a camera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had an old Canon Flex that my dad bought probably back in the 50s. So, you know, I was using that. My dad wasn't taking pictures much anymore, so he let me use the camera. I'd shoot slides and send it off to get developed. I remember waiting for it to come back, and I'm always excited to look at it. As almost like a kid in a candy store scenario. You know, you put these things up to a light and look at the, you know, the colors and the composition. But once I lived here, the place was starting to eat me up as far as the inspiration. You know, my photography just kind of snowballed.
Do you remember the first time you sold some of your art?
Yeah, probably through some friends. I did slideshows, either at people's homes. One time I did a slide presentation at the community building for some of the local homemakers extension group.
Okay.
They really enjoyed it. And of course the lights were off as I'm doing this, and I'm flipping slides up, and then I ended the show with a nice sunset. And lo and behold, these people had been passing a hat and putting money in it for me. I don't remember how much it was, but it was, you know, it was greatly appreciated, and I saw how people appreciated what I was doing.
Gail Quidley Scarborough talks about learning how to build a pound net with her husband, Russell Quidley, in an interview with Susan West.
So he started fishing. He started pound netting, and it was hard to get somebody. He knew about nets, but he knew how to make a net, tie a net. He knew how to do that, but he had never constructed a pound net. I remember Mr. Perry and Mr. Lawrence down in Austin, his brothers. They pound netted, and we'd ride down, you know, of course, when they came in, and Russell they'd tell him things, and we'd listen, and he watched them, and I did too. I mean, he knew how to tie a net, and I sort of learned too, just helping him. The regular net wasn't too bad. The pound and the hearts, or lead line and cork line, and he knew how to do that, but it was cutting the tunnel. The tunnel is a square, 40-foot square. 40 foot, and then it'll have two hearts, and they're like triangles. They're attached to it, and then there's a lead, but you have to have the tunnel, and then you put an iron on it, but you have to cut it on a bias. It starts out very small and ends up, you know, bigger. So I can remember going up to Spencer's restaurant. Mr. Ari Spencer had pound netted up in, I think, the Wanchese area for years. And he would know how to cut the tunnel. So he was helping his son in the restaurant. So he'd come out in between making these hush puppies. and we'd be working on this tunnel, you know. He'd show us how to cut it and line it.
Where did you buy the netting material?
The lead you usually had to have, well, they made it up there. Reedsville has great big nets that they use for Reedsville, Virginia. And they use them for
Menhaden?
Menhaden
okay.
boats. And the Menhaden boats go out. After a while, you know, they tear and they have to make new ones, but they sell them, and they're big enough, so you cut your own net. So we'd go buy 3 or 4 of those. You'd have to mend them. and cut what you needed out. Then you'd line it, both on the bottom with leads to keep it down, and on the top with corks to make it float.
Fifth-generation Hatteras fisherman Michael Peel talks to Susan West about the days when fish were shipped by boat. What kind of work did your dad do?
Fished 5 generations. My brother fished, and all my uncles were heavy fishermen. One was Nacy Austin Peel. One was Wallace Lee Peel. They fished in the ocean. They fished gill nets. They long hauled, and they set netted, and they pound netted. My Uncle Lee started a fish house years ago, and then both uncles started it or redone it later on. Now it's come to me. The fish house that's there now was put there in 1978.
Do you know what happened to the fish that was brought in there, where it went?
Freight boat called the Hatteras and boated across the Sound. It was packed in sawdust and ice. Croakers, trout, and flounders, and bluefish. They would take and put them in wooden fish boxes and paint their name on them, and they went to Fulton Fish Market. They had a stencil that they painted their names on the cartons.
So was that Peel fish, or what was the name of it?
It just had the person's name, like Leo Peel. All the fishermen had their own stencils when they shipped fish. I cleaned the old house out there and found one for Zach Austin. Big cakes of ice, 300-pound blocks of ice packed in sawdust, and they would shave it and they'd ice it in cartons or wooden boxes, and they would send it.
Isn't that something?
There wasn't no truck off the island. It was all freight boat.
Right.
This is Liz Browning Fox. My uncle, retired U.S. Coast Guardsman William Shoemaker, came to Hatteras Island right out of boot camp in the 1950s. He shared some of his first impressions of this sandbar we both call home.
I come down here in the Coast Guard right straight out of boot camp in 1957, and I was stationed at the Buxton Station, I think 2.5, 3 years before I got transferred down to Hatteras Inlet. But that was back in the days with the Coast Guard. Each Coast Guard station had a lookout tower. I believe they were all 60 foot or so tall, and had a good view of Cape Shoals, Diamond Shoals, and that was manned 24 hours a day, and always had somebody up there looking for flares or distress signals. And as technology advanced, the helicopters more or less took over that duty. If it see somebody, rather than getting the beach cart apparatus out, they'd just get a helicopter out of Elizabeth City and do a rescue. But that was advance in technology, which was good. It was quicker, safer. But it was back in the days when you did those. It was good experience, good teamwork, and enjoyable. I enjoyed it, every bit of it.
Did you ask to come here, or did they send you?
No, it was just a need for a new body down here at the group, the Coast Guard, and I was a bunch of us out of boot camp were at the Berkeley base at the time, and my name come up, and they sent 2 of us down here to Seaman Apprentice right out of boot camp down to Group Cape Hatteras. Well, he left Norfolk and got down as far as Kill Double Hills and had to spend the night in the Coast Guard station there, which has now been moved, gone. But 2 boots out of boot camp. Get your gear and going up and get to bed up there. So naturally we did, and about, I don't know, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, they woke us up to get your uniforms on. You're going across inlet. Well, what inlet, where, whatever. We didn't know what was happening. Come to find out that they had a medevac down here on the island, a medical emergency, and they needed to get this person off the island. That's before the bridge, so the Coast Guard naturally would take them across the inlet. Well, helicopters couldn't fly, the weather was that bad, so they employed the 30-footer. Well, the ambulance was coming down to pick up this person, stopped at the station, picked us up, took us down to the ferry ramp at Oregon Inlet. We jumped on this 30-footer. They took this person off, put them in the ambulance, and we got on the boat and struck out for, we didn't have any idea. Rough, banging, waves, couldn't see anything, got over to the other side. They said, go on up there and get in your bed. It's up on the second deck. There's a bunk up there for you. Did that and woke up the next morning. Actually didn't sleep too much, but as I looked out the window, I was looking to the east, and all I could see was ocean, sand dunes, and sea oats. I said, Lord, where am I? Where is this? What have I done? What is this place? I had no idea where I was. But as it turned out, 3 or 4 years later, I found my true love in Hatteras, Sarah Burris, one of the Burris clan down there, and married her, but that's all another story.
Coastal Voices thanks the storytellers, the community oral historians, and Radio Hatteras for their support. And we thank you for joining us this evening. Good night.